Hello and welcome back to another episode of Conf T with your SE. I am your host, Brian Young. I'm joined by my new co-host, Mr. Tom Porto. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Now, Tom, I have to ask, what is the castle behind you?
That's Frozen. That's Arendelle right there. Listen, you want to build a snowman?
I don't know if we can say that. We might get a letter from Disney there. But yes, I would love to build a snowman next year. We're getting into spring now. I don't want to go back to the snow. I'm done. I want some warm weather. Let's go.
Agreed.
So why do you have Arendelle in your office there? I'm just curious.
Currently in my twin daughter's playroom while my office is being finished. So a couple weeks, I'll be out of here.
A couple more weeks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, don't get too distracted with the Arendelle Castle. And we also have a guest here. But before we introduce him, a few things we want to go over. Want to mention that Cisco Live is next week, March 30th through April 1st. There are two registration tiers. There's the Explorer Path, which is free, or the All Access, which is only $349 or 4 learning credits. Again, with COVID, just like last year, this is going to be an all remote digital session. But the All Access tier does give you a lot of really good benefits, including access to the technical breakout sessions, hands-on labs, and DevNet workshop, meet the engineer sessions, and some discounted certification offers. So please go to ciscolive.com to learn more and to register today. Also want to let you guys know about a really cool Discord server that we came across. We have been talking with the guys from the Art of Network Engineering podcast, and they have a Discord server called It's All About the Journey. We'll be sure to put a link in the show notes, but we highly recommend you check it out. It's great for people that are just getting started in IT, or even veterans that have been in the industry for a long time. It's all about networking, helping each other out. You know, it's a really cool thing. So be sure to check it out. Again, link in the show notes, and come say hi to myself, Conf T Brian, or Tom P the SE, which would be Mr. Tom Porto, and be sure to say hello. So on that note, we'll go over to our guest here, Mr. Keith Manville. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you guys?
Doing good. Keith, welcome back to the show. I think you were on one of the single digit episodes now.
About 2 years ago.
Wow, that's crazy. So Keith, you're a technical solutions architect for what exactly?
So technical solutions architect covering the advanced threats portfolio, Secure Endpoint, formerly known as AMP for Endpoints. That's my specialty. That's what I live and breathe and do every day.
Awesome. So today's topic is all about threat hunting with AMP. So let's just dive right into it, man. So AMP for Endpoints has been, again, a topic that we covered before. We kind of went over the ins and outs of it. There's been a lot of changes and a lot of just new developments and features that have come out since we last spoke. So it was a good idea to get you back on the episode. So tell me, what are we doing with threat hunting with AMP now? Let's kind of go through what is the process of threat hunting first.
All right. So if we take a step back, what is threat hunting? It's proactively searching your environment for what I call the little breadcrumbs that would lead to the existence of an advanced persistent threat in your environment. So an example of that would be maybe searching for a registry key that an attacker set, those kind of things. So, Secure Endpoint, formerly known as AMP for Endpoints, really good at detecting those malicious files, those suspicious behaviors. But what about, like I called them earlier, the little breadcrumbs, right? The evidence that something bad has happened. That's where we have made improvements to the product, and that's where we're able to do this proactive threat hunting and really try to find those advanced persistent threats.
How do we go about determining what those breadcrumbs are? Like you mentioned, a registry key. How would I know that there's a specific type of registry key that I should be looking for?
Right. So a good starting point would be the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And for those that don't know, MITRE ATT&CK framework is a repository of tactics, techniques, and procedures that the MITRE Corporation has collected and put into this catalog that allows us to understand what attackers typically do. Okay, so there's a bunch of different categories. For example, persistence would be a category. What do they do in terms of persistence? Well, they create scheduled tasks, they create registry keys that auto run programs, those types of things. So for me, threat hunting, I'm going to start with the MITRE ATT&CK framework and really go through each one. Maybe this week I'm going to focus on persistence, for example. Maybe next week I'll focus on credentialed access, those kind of things. And I'll start to design hunts based on that framework.
So once you have that framework set up, right? We've got the pieces, we got the registry keys, or certain things that we know that we're going to be looking for. What would be the next step? What kind of tools would we be using? Is it now? I'm sorry, you mentioned before AMP for Endpoints. There's a new name for it.
Yes.
Right. What is the new name?
Secure Endpoint. So we've rebranded the portfolio to be Secure Product, right? So AMP for Endpoints became Secure Endpoint. Email security, formerly known as Ironport, that became Secure Email, et cetera.
Okay, so Secure Endpoint, because I want to make sure I'm using the right term here.
Correct.
So Secure Endpoint, is that the only tool that we're going to be using for threat hunting, or is there other tools that we could be using inside or outside of Cisco?
So really, when we're doing threat hunting, we need to be able to query our endpoints, for example. Mm-hmm. And within Secure Endpoint, we've added a functionality or a component called Orbital. Orbital is basically Cisco's version of OS query. Okay, and really what that does is it turns your endpoints into little databases that we can ask questions of. So, for example, query my endpoints for the existence of a registry key that's going to start up a file, or even searching for a file, right? So within AMP for Endpoints, I can search for when a file is moved, copied, created, or executed. But what about that file that's just sitting there doing nothing? I can use Orbital to go search for that. So again, searching for the breadcrumbs, asking questions of my endpoints. I would definitely use Orbital to do those types of things.
So explain to me a little bit more how the Orbital engine works, because I've been kind of seeing this show up in a lot of the updates and the feature releases and stuff, and I know it's something that I want to use. But if you could kind of just go through the steps there and what it does.
Sure.
A little bit more in depth.
Sure. It's fantastic. This is something that I was really excited about. Being a former database administrator, I kind of gravitated towards this product just kind of naturally. And really, what's happening here is little tables are built on the endpoint. So if I just kind of focus on the endpoint for a few minutes here, Orbital. Again, it's OS query under the hood, but Orbital will create these little tables, these virtual tables that collect data from my endpoint for me. And let's say I want to ask my endpoints, do they have a certain hotfix or patch installed? Well, then I can write a query, and the query looks like just your kind of structured query language, or SQL. Again, another reason why I sort of gravitated towards this. That was in my background, so came naturally for me. So select star where, for example, does this patch exist on these endpoints? And I can get that answer very quickly. Yes, these machines have this patch installed, these don't. So all of that info came from the little virtual table that was created on the endpoint. And really where the power of Orbital comes is when you scale it out. So not just asking one endpoint, do you have this patch installed, but asking across your entire fleet, which endpoints don't have this patch installed, for example. And then I can distill that down to endpoints that I want to focus on. Well, how come they don't have this patch installed? Just an example there of using another query to get that data back to me and then go from there.
So it really allows you to kind of search by whatever you want there versus just relying on some pre-built query. You can really just make your own.
It's, the thing about OS Query is OS Query was originally created by Facebook. It is now maintained by the Linux Foundation. Okay, so it's open source. And so different companies will start to instantiate their own version of that functionality. Like we did, we call it Orbital, right? But really, I bring that up because there are repositories online that have sample queries that you can run. Cisco we post our own in our Talos blog. There may be a threat, and they may list a query. Hey, run this query in your environment, for example, to detect this behavior. Other vendors create queries for OS Query that we can leverage as well. So really, and you can, as you said, you can write your own. So if you can think it, and the table exists in the schema, which is open source. Again, you can go look what the schema is. Then you can certainly write those queries. You could get really advanced queries that do joins and inner joins, outer joins, all that good stuff. Or it can just be something simple like who's the logged on user right now? Select star from logged on user, something like that.
Wow, that is very powerful. So, and you don't necessarily need to have the SQL writing knowledge and background, right? You can just go ahead and grab a couple of pre-made queries and just copy and paste it right in.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, again, for me, I kind of I took an interest in trying to write my own queries, but Cisco, in our version of OS Query inside of Orbital, we have pre-made or canned queries that you can literally just click the little plus button on, and that query is ready to run in your environment. So an example of this use case would be searching for vulnerable systems to a specific threat. And one of the examples that we have is one. Do these systems have this patch installed? Yes or no? Okay, that's great. But two, do these systems technically, are they still vulnerable to this, the exploit, for example? Is this port opened or whatever is associated with the vulnerability? So you can really make these as complex as you want, or you can just simply add the pre-canned queries in and go from there. So it's low barriers to entry.
Very nice. So all right, let's say that you've gone through Orbital and you've run a particular query, right? You're looking for a registry key that's linked with some campaign that has been in the news lately. And you find 3 endpoints that have that registry key. What can you do there?
So this is where we tie in SecureX. So for those who haven't heard of SecureX yet, this is our security platform. It's really where all of the security, Cisco security products get tied together, get integrated together. And in your example there, let's say I'm doing a proactive threat hunt. And based on my threat intelligence, I've determined that I want to go search my environment for the existence of a registry key that maybe automatically starts up a program on system reboot. So I drag that query into the editor and I click execute, and like you've said, 3 systems show up that have that registry key there. Well, what can I do next? Well, with SecureX, I can leverage orchestration to go ahead and perform response actions. So maybe I want to isolate those systems. Okay, so literally clicking the IP address, I'll get a menu using the browser extension, and I can add those hosts to an isolation policy. Okay, though that'd be step 1 for me. Step 2, maybe I want to gather more data. And for that, I'll use what we call a forensic snapshot. A forensic snapshot is the closest thing to a dump of the live memory that we can get without rebooting the system. And what I'll use this for is just to gather what was happening on that system at that point in time. So what users are logged on, what ports are open, what processes are running, those types of things. And really what a forensic snapshot is under the hood, it's a collection of orbital queries, right? So maybe there's 10 or so in there. Go get the answers to these questions, catalog that inside the secure endpoint console, which would allow me to look into that deeper and understand what was going on. So if I found 3 machines, the first thing I'd probably do is isolate those, gather the forensic snapshot to see what else is running, and then after I get that information, I can proceed further with my incident response type flow.
Now, with the orchestration here, how much of that? I mean, how much of this can be automated? I mean, if I want to go ahead and we're kind of looking at it in kind of real time, right? Where I'm saying, okay, I ran an orbital search, I found a bunch of stuff. Now I'm going to go in SecureX and I'm going to set it up to take a forensic snapshot, isolate the endpoint, and then I can work on it later. And this is something that I imagine with SecureX that we can kind of set up as an automatic kind of, I don't know how the term would be, but we could set it up to happen automatically where, hey, next time that this particular registry key is found, go ahead and start running through these steps. Is that doable or?
100%. So I like to break this into 2 different sections. The first piece of let's talk about automation, right? So the first piece here is when Secure Endpoint detects an event, right? And let's say that event is at a certain severity level. Mm-hmm. I want Secure Endpoint to do something automatically. Forensic snapshot, isolate host, move computer to a different group, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. That is literally no code. It's just turning it on, and it will do that when an event of specified severity is detected. Mm-hmm. Now, the other side of that, which kind of you were getting into, would be automating actions after a threat hunt, for example. So if I'm leveraging Orbital to search my environment for something, then I can also leverage SecureX orchestration to go ahead and do something if the query returns something interesting for me. And again, that one I would call as low to no code, because the orchestration components, you're literally dragging things onto the canvas, doing some light configuration, and we can have orchestration kick off isolation for us, or submit file to our sandbox, right? Threat Grid, Secure Malware Analytics is what it's called now. So all of those response actions that you'd like to do in the event of something being detected, or in the event of a threat hunt that produced something, we can leverage SecureX orchestration to automate that and really make our jobs as defenders easier.
Which is not an easy job.
No.
Tom, anything you want to ask?
Yeah, I do actually. Keith, how about, is there any OS limitation to using Orbital? Does it only work with Windows? How does that look?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, it was first created for Linux systems. Now, Cisco's implementation of OS query called Orbital, that's currently working for Windows systems. That's our largest footprint, so we focus there first. We'll be releasing Orbital for Mac OS in the near future, as well as Linux.
Awesome.
Nice.
And how about, so how do we interface with Orbital, right? Is it a website we go to? Is it an API? Does it have an API that can be queried outside of its regular interface? How does that work?
Sure. So let's go to the API piece first. All of our stuff has APIs, and that's kind of one of our foundational tenets. Orbital also has an API, so we can leverage that to programmatically do things with Orbital. How do we access Orbital? Well, we can pivot right from SecureX. So if I'm in the ribbon within SecureX, or if I'm in threat response in SecureX, or if I'm in Secure Endpoint I can pivot right to the Orbital console to run those queries. Again, we could potentially leverage SecureX orchestration to automate some of those queries, and I can kick those off right from either the browser extension or any other context menus that give me that option.
Awesome.
So, Keith, you mentioned the endpoint isolation piece. Now, I remember when this feature came out, I was skeptical. And when I tried it, I was very impressed.
Mhm.
So, I don't think endpoint isolation was around when we first did our last recording with you. So, can we talk a little bit about what it is, how it works, how it can be modified, and just how effective it is?
Sure. Yeah, it definitely was not available then. I don't recall talking about it, but I do recall being excited for it to come. So, endpoint isolation essentially knocks the system off the network. Okay, and the power of this is it doesn't have to be local. Okay, with this whole work from home stuff, if I have a threat, a severe threat detected on a remote machine, I can leverage endpoint isolation from within Secure Endpoint to go ahead and isolate that machine as well. The beauty of it is the isolation allows communication back to the AMP cloud to persist. So we can do things like forensic snapshots and digging into device trajectory or kicking off scans, those kinds of things. I can still do that even though a machine has been isolated. But I'm preventing any maliciousness from moving laterally, for example. Now, it is very fast. So once I turn isolation on for a machine, it happens almost instantly.
Right.
And like I said, we'll allow the communications to persist out to the AMP cloud, but I can also specify IP addresses that I want to allow. So I always tell customers this is useful where if I have a maybe a security kind of management machine that I want to remote desktop into this machine from, well, then I can allow my IP address to persist through the isolation.
Right. Yeah, no, that's huge. And again, all those things. Again, I was a little skeptical because you're hitting endpoint isolation. And you're expecting okay, it's going to heartbeat in like 30 seconds, a couple minutes, whatever. No, instantly, you're running a ping and it starts seeing general failure, and you stop isolation, and hey, all of a sudden you're getting your replies back. And the other thing that I noticed too, when we're talking, because we've been talking about automation, right? Remind me where it is, but there's the I think it's triggered actions. Is that what it's called in the menu?
Automated actions.
Automated actions. So automated actions in the secure endpoint dashboard will allow you to turn on a feature, and you can adjust it where if there's a certain number of a specified level of events that happen, right, whether it's high or critical, that happen in a certain amount of time, just automatically turn on endpoint isolation. Now, I have gotten burned. I have seen customers get burned by this. Be careful, right? You want to make sure that you're also setting up notifications to be sent to your email when endpoints are isolated so that you know and you're not trying to figure out why won't this thing connect to the internet. That's why. But all that aside, very effective tool. And again, if you have a piece of malware that's active on that machine, you don't want it talking to the local internet. You don't want it talking to a command and control server. You want it to just be isolated. And this is by far the fastest and easiest way to do some type of basically NAC control, right? You think of the way ICE does it, right? With remediation VLANs and change of authorization. That's all well and good on the network.
Right.
And it takes a lot to get there. Whereas with Secure Endpoint, you just deploy the software, it's there. You hit isolation, you set up your rules, you set up your automation piece, and it works. So really, really cool stuff there. Tom, I don't know if you had any other questions you wanted to, or anything you wanted to add there.
I don't. It is a really cool. That is a very cool feature, though.
Yeah, definitely. So Keith, unless you had anything else on the the endpoint isolation stuff, I wanted to kind of talk about the engines that make up the secure endpoint product. So let's kind of go through those if you would. I know there's quite a few. If we can just kind of touch on them and kind of understand what they do and why this product is as good as it is.
Sure. So let's start with kind of a basic engine that is kind of the bread and butter, the file or the hash lookup. So is this file good or bad? Right. So it's a simple calculate the hash, ask the AMP cloud, do we know about this? Yes or no? Right. That's table stakes.
And that's very fast. All things considered,
correct.
right? The lookup is very fast.
We're talking milliseconds.
Right.
Okay. The next, if I kind of go down the chain here, the next one is going to start to be in line with different types of attacks. So we have an engine that looks at behavior that is specific to ransomware, right? So what does ransomware look like? Encrypting files, changing the desktop background, those types of things. So we string that chain of behaviors together, and we can detect that as ransomware and go ahead and stop the behavior from happening, quarantine the process that started it. And then, like you've noted earlier, if we've got automated actions configured, isolate that host, those types of things, capture the forensic snapshot. Mm-hmm. Now, we also have engines that look at memory-based attacks, right? So we're looking for those applications that are typically exploited. And what we're doing is we're basically setting up I like to think of it as a honeypot on the system. And so if attackers are trying to go after my browser, for example, well, they're going to go to the location where they think it is, and I've already moved it somewhere else. So when you go there, I know that you're a malicious actor because I've already moved you. The system knows I moved you, but the attacker doesn't. So that type of engine really helps us prevent those memory-based attacks. Another engine that's really powerful here is our system process protection. And this engine really protects those critical Windows system processes like LSAS, like logon, right? WinLogon. And this one prevents those Mimikatz style attacks, so dumping credentials. And what's great about this is, you may be able to sneak a version of Mimikatz or Mimi dogs, right, down to the system. But when it actually tries to dump the LSAS, well, then this engine steps in and blocks that from happening. And of course, would throw an event. And again, we can trigger all those other things we talked about in terms of automation. Another engine that is pretty recent is our behavioral protection engine. And so for this one, what we're doing is cataloging behaviors that we want to notify the customer about. For example, let's say Word launching PowerShell. That by itself isn't anything malicious, right? But it's something that probably shouldn't be happening. Right. I could think of a couple examples of Word launching PowerShell, maybe some super user type sysadmin guys or girls. But really, if Word launches PowerShell, that's something that needs to be flagged and dealt with. Right. So this engine, again, it's behavioral protection. It's going to take those behaviors and find them. And then again, let's go trigger automated actions. Let's notify those kind of things.
Is there some sort of, I hate to use the word AI, but is there some sort of like machine learning AI kind of component to this that, puts it together and it kind of shows that behavioral engine, these things aren't right? I mean, I know that one of the pieces here is the fuzzy fingerprinting, right? Where if a file has kind of changed its hash a little bit, added a byte to itself to make itself look different as it's replicating throughout the network, we use fuzzy fingerprinting to be able to kind of overlook that and say, hey, listen, it hasn't changed that much. It's very similar to this other file that we know about. Therefore, it looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, must be a duck.
Right.
Is that kind of same idea and component in this behavioral protection engine in terms of trying to train the machine into knowing what to look out for?
So we've got two other engines, and one of those that you mentioned there does the fuzzy fingerprinting component of it. The engine that I also kind of loop into that category there is our machine learning engine, and that one certainly does look at file attributes to understand, hey, what are we seeing here? Do we need to escalate this up? Those kind of things. So that certainly is built into the product. Machine learning, fuzzy fingerprinting, SHA lookups, behavioral identification and protection, memory-based attacks, ransomware, all of those kind of industry themes that we hear about and see in the real world. That's all built into the product now.
Wow. Sounds like you got everything you need, at least for now. I find it hilarious. Like when you were telling me about the piece about where the browser memory should be, and if the system knows it's been moved, but if malware tries to access that location, it's a honeypot. It just blows my mind the amount of things that we need to do to defend against the various types of attacks. Right? I think the mantra still holds true that defenders need to be right all the time, whereas attackers just need to be right once. So it's incredible the amount of learning and information that goes into this. I mean, I know that you got organizations that are still dealing with recent breaches like SolarWinds and everything else, right? They're just still reeling with it. And then here comes the next thing. Oh, there's a issue with Outlook Exchange server. It's like, oh my God.
Right.
It just never ends. And of course you can always go back after the fact, and hindsight's always 2020. Like, oh, well, if you did this and you had this and you did this and over here, and you'd be fine. But it's people that are in IT, especially in the security fields, right? Or if they're just wearing the security hat because that's the budget that the company has for it, right? You got to find ways to help yourself, and as much automation orchestration as you can do as many engines as you can have. And that doesn't necessarily mean having a bunch of products, right? I have customers that come to me all the time, and they're asking about, they have this mindset that they want the best of breed of everything, right? So they'll get vendor A for this and vendor B for that and vendor C for that because they're the top in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And Cisco is usually there. If we're not number one, we're close to it. But especially, we talked about this in the Secure X episode, and Keith, you touched on it a little bit here too. When you start putting everything under that single management umbrella, where there's not just management, not just a single pane of glass to look at everything and give you nice, feel good, fuzzy graphs and charts, right? But being able to orchestrate and say, hey, you know what? This endpoint found this weird behavior based on an email or attachment that they got on an email that went through the email security and talked to this URL on this port, right? That's email security, firepower, umbrella, and secure endpoint right there that have seen it. And if you've got a vendor in each one of those spaces, they're not going to talk to each other. They're not going to share any information. They're not going to, work together on try to isolate the endpoint. And for the secure endpoint piece, let's say the behavioral engine didn't see it, didn't see anything weird going on, but the email software, just the email security, just happened to notice that, hey, you know what? I ran that file through the secure malware analytics, also known or previously known as ThreatGrid, right? And 30 minutes later, it came back as malicious. Or I saw that a year ago and it was fine, but now all of a sudden it's malicious. Well, let's get that endpoint isolated. What is an email security platform outside of Cisco going to be able to do to get that endpoint isolated and not talking to the rest of the network and the internet and everything else, right? Usually nothing, except for when it's Cisco. So, I hate to turn this into a sales call, but really, guys, as much as you can orchestrate and automate, you have to do that. I mean, I see it in my firepower logs on my home internet connection. We were just talking about this before we hit record. All day long, my firewall is getting hit constantly. You look at my IP address, I'm on what's that But Shodan, I'm on Shodan. All my services are listed there. They know. They know and I've got everything on a static IP. So I can't just hop around and hope that no one else will catch me, right? I'm getting hit constantly, inside and outside the country. And I don't want to be monitoring my security stuff constantly. I don't have an IT department supporting me here.
Right.
So whatever you can do to automate, orchestrate, and just have your products collaborate. I wanted to fit one more word in there. It's just going to make you safer. So I'll shut up now. Tom, I don't know if you had any questions or comments for Keith here.
No, I was going to say that I think gone are the days of, I'm going to throw an ASA or a firewall up at the edge, put some, generic brand antivirus on all the machines and call yourself done. I mean, there are so many different attack surfaces, that to Keith's and Brian, your point that, there are so many things that can be hit and they're changing every day. So it does help, that automation orchestration is very important. While, a lot of people are afraid of that, like, oh, am I automating myself out of a job? No, man, you're just making sure that not only do you have a job, but that, when the S hits the fan, you're ready to go. To your point, don't want to make this a sales call, but I find, that I get that best of breed comment as well a lot, with a lot of my customers too. And I say, look, take a scenario where you suspect you may have been attacked in some way. How many portals are you going to have to touch to do that threat hunting? And, the answer is usually, oh, well, I've got like 5 or 6. I'm like, all right, well, with a unified, solution, you're touching 1 or 2 places at the most, and you can pivot between them easily. Right. It's going to save you a significant amount of time. So it's worth considering for sure.
And when you say S hits the fan, you meant Snowman, right?
Yes. Yeah. When Olaf, boom.
Good old Olaf.
That's when you take action.
Oh God, I can visualize it now. There's a carrot going that way. All right, sorry.
There's no children listening.
Yes. Sorry, this show has been rated R. No. Keith, I think this has been great. I do want to touch real quick on one more component. I didn't put it in the notes, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Cisco, what was it? It was CTR.
It's SecureX Threat Response now.
Thank you.
So
I have all the old names. I don't have the new names. So.
This is how long you've been at Cisco, right? It started off being referred to as visibility. In fact, the URL still is visibility. Mm. And then we changed it to Cisco Threat Response. People call it CTR. Once we've created our security platform called SecureX, we're now calling it SecureX Threat Response.
Which I'm glad they changed it from visibility, because I accidentally would click on the other visibility link in front of customers and be like, oh, wait, this isn't what I want to show. It's an internal tool. Those at Cisco will get what I'm talking about. It's not something I want to show customers. So yes, no. But continue, Keith. I'm sorry.
Right. So threat. We'll just abbreviate it. Threat response, part of SecureX. This is the component, and I think you guys talked about this on a previous SecureX episode. But this is the component that allows us to do threat research or incident response type activities. So I'm glad you brought this up, because this is a really good segue back to the automation piece. Threat research. Let's start there. So Twitter, Cisco Talos blogs, other vendors' blogs. There's so much information about threats that come out daily. Really, how do you stay on top of that stuff? And threat response allows you to quickly ascertain, am I protected? Am I already impacted by this threat? The way it does that is threat response at its core is an API aggregator. So threat response will connect to your security products over API and ask questions of those products. So, for example, if I'm reading a Twitter post about a threat, and then I get over to the web page that has indicators of compromise listed, or IOCs, I can quickly grab those IOCs, drop them into threat response, and click investigate. What happens there now is threat response first asks the Cisco threat intelligence, hey, do we know about these IOCs? Okay, so let's say they come back malicious. Yep, we know about them. They're malicious. So I can say to myself, where I have secure endpoint deployed, I know that those, in the example of a file hash, I know they would be blocked. The other half of that question, though, am I impacted? So the second phase here is for threat response to go out and ask your secure endpoint deployment, have these IOCs been seen anywhere? Okay. Right. Have they been seen in my environment? So if they have,
what happened if they were?
Right. So if they have, I'll start to see little icons pop up in the form of targets. So I know these. We'll just use file hashes in this case. I know these file hashes are malicious, and hey, they've been seen on 2 machines in my environment. So from there, then I've transitioned from a threat research type activity into an incident response type activity, and then I'm just going to go right down the steps that SANS has published, right? Identification, containment, right? Those kinds of things. So really, let's jump into containment. Let's understand what's going on there, and then contain. And we already talked about isolation there, so that can help me keep this threat contained. So threat response is super powerful. Again, it is part of SecureX. It allows me to go ahead and search my environment for these indicators of compromise, and really. The power there is also leveraging the orchestration component. So right within threat response, I can trigger an orchestration workflow or playbook. Isolate this host, capture a forensic snapshot. We haven't even talked about the capabilities there, but maybe I want to send an email, post into a Teams room, create a ServiceNow ticket. So you can start to string all of these activities together in orchestration, and I can trigger those from threat response. So super powerful, doing the threat research, doing the incident response type activities.
Awesome stuff. Listen, I'm sorry about all the hand signals. My wife is down here. We got someone at the door. The dog's barking. I think I heard Keith's kid, or at times I'm not sure whose. So let's wrap this one up quickly. Keith, thank you very much. I think this has been super helpful. We'll be sure to post a link for your LinkedIn, and of course, reach out to him on the Discord server as well at Kman. Keith, thanks a lot. Really appreciate the time. And we'll hope to have you on again. And with that, I think we'll sign off on this one.
This time sooner than 2 years.
Yes. Sooner than 2 years. All right, guys. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening to Conf T.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.